met in 2001. And, you know, I think it's funny because we were polar opposites.
Yeah. I'm a white person. She's a young lady of color. And so, I mean, honestly, the differences didn't stop there. I mean, you know, we had been brought up in very similar environments. Our parents were both believers, brought up in the church, I'd say is a common way to say that, middle class to some extent. But other than that, I mean, my parents were fairly liberal when it came to, you know, hey, go out on your bike and drive around in the neighborhood for hours. And her parents were like, go out in the backyard, but only as long as you have bubble tape completely around your head, neck, and vital organs. And so obviously when that all came together and we bought our first house together after we were dating for a few months, and then we moved in together, which is biblically inappropriate, and we would not suggest that.
Story is we met in 01 and Chip liked me a whole lot.
Yeah,
He
right.
kind of scared me. I thought he was somewhat of a stalker. But then I realized he had a really good heart. We dated for a year and he proposed. We were married a year and a half later.
Our love story is pretty simple. She saw me, she was completely enamored, for obvious reasons. And I came over to her and I said, listen, what is your sister doing later? And she said, oh, my sister's married. And I said, well then, fair enough, what are you doing later? And she said, I have no plans because I haven't dated anyone in like 18 years. And I said, well, you're in for the ride of your life, young lady. Are you ready to pony up? And she said, I don't even know what that means, but let's do it. And so the next thing you know, we had 4 children, and now we're writing basically marriage seminars. We speak on marriage and love making.
Our short love story, we dated. Our short story is that we met each other in 2001. We were married in 2003, and from the beginning, I think it was just a fun kind of roller coaster. I was a safe kind of overprotected child, and Chip was this rowdy kind of risky guy. And so if you can imagine those two worlds colliding, it was very interesting. But somehow we figured out a way to make that work and have fun with it.
Sure. And I think the one piece of advice that I'd give myself, if I could go back in time and tell myself some piece of advice that would help our marriage, to be honest, it was just the idea that when I learned how to embrace Joanna for who she is and really support her all the way, I feel like that was a real light bulb moment for me in my relationship with her. And ironically, I think that it was a back and forth, you know, as I really enveloped this concept of I'm going to support her and love her and fight for her regardless. I feel like that opened your heart to be able to reciprocate, you know? I think like loving somebody is top rolled down, James Dean and whomever, flying through the mountains, going too fast, reckless. And your idea was no, bubble tape, yeah, sitting around,
wrapped up,
eating church's chicken.
If I didn't have Chip Gaines in my life, I'd still be dreaming in my head, but not acting out on any of that, not living it out. You push me. You push me out of my comfort zone. I like comfortable. I like predictable. And you push me.
Am I any of those?
No.
Not comfortable or predictable?
You're comfortable in that you're consistent in just who you are as Chip, but you're definitely not predictable.
I think that's one of the reasons that I love her like I do. I mean, I feel like she knows me in a way that has caused me to stop acting. You know, I feel like I've really been an actor. I've been a character my whole life. I've always tried to prove something to someone.
This is really what we do. All of you in this group, we all kind of have really the same story. I think even last night when Chip was playing in the Washer tournament, we met a lot of husband and wife, just partners. And so, you know, we just love being in this industry, just helping communities one project at a time. So Chip and I met after Baylor. Chip went to Baylor, and while he was a college student, he started getting into the idea of real estate, flipping houses, and I was actually working for my father. He had an automotive store, so for 10 years I was kind of his accountant, bookkeeper, and we ended up meeting at my dad's Firestone store. Chip was a customer, and I had done some local commercials for my dad, so right when Chip walked in, as only Chip can do, he
And
was...
like Megan, she was a fox. I mean it. I mean, on camera, even back in her early 20s when she really didn't know a whole lot about the business or the industry. I mean, she was easy to look at.
Thanks, Chip. That's awesome. So I went to school for broadcast journalism. I always wanted to do something in television. Well, when I met Chip, he was just an interesting guy because he was such a risk taker. Everything he looked at, whether it be a home or an automobile, it was an investment. He thought, hey, this is undervalued. We'll put some value in it. We'll sell it for this. So while we were dating, he would just show me all these properties he was working on, and I thought the guy was a freak because the things he would buy, I'd look at it and go, what's wrong with you? He scared my parents. He scared my friends. But through it all, I started realizing he's got some really good instincts, and when you can see past the obvious, there's actually a lot of potential. So we get married in 2003, and I remember, even on our honeymoon, I remember telling Chip, hey, when I was working for my dad, I always had this dream of owning my own business, whether that be a home decor store or a bakery. The only issue with that was that I'd never baked for more than like 6 people, and I'd never done anything design related. And I remember Chip, even on our honeymoon, was just kind of pushing me towards that dream, saying, hey, if you're gonna do something, now's the time to do it. So I started getting that wind at my back and thinking about that. So we're on this 2-week honeymoon, and Chip had decided when we get home, we're gonna stay in one of his rental properties that he decided not to lease it, and we were gonna go in and fix it up, and it'd be our first fixer-upper together. He's not really a details guy, so when we get back from our honeymoon, he'd forgotten to do a few things with the house. There was no electricity for several weeks, and it was July. And there were some college athletes in the house before that had like 5 animals. So if you can imagine the smell, when we walk in, I remember it was like 8 o'clock at night. We'd just been on this amazing, dreamy honeymoon. And I thought, oh, this is gonna be a good, dreamy life. Then he carries me across the threshold and this smell just hits me. So we're laying on the floor and Chip is out cold and I just start bawling. I'm like, this isn't good. And I was thinking, is this what my life is gonna look like with this Chip Gaines guy? So I, as you can imagine, hit him, wake him up. And I said, we're out of here. I can't do this. The smell was just so bad. And the next day, we ended up having a friend of ours wheel us out. But that was the start of our first week of marriage together. And we decide, hey, we can do this. We start fixing up the house. At the same time, Chip kept encouraging me to go find a little building. Let's see if we can get it financed. And so I had been shopping around, and I found this small little building on Bosque. And we ended up deciding that's the one we're gonna do. And at the time, I still had no idea what I was gonna do with it.
This is some of the things that we learned early in our marriage were just how different we had been brought up. I mean, superficially, if you wrote it all down on a piece of paper, I mean, we were just almost identical. I mean, our parents were very similar, similar upbringings, even financially speaking, I would almost say, just very, very similar circumstances. But in my family, we were all risk takers, kind of daredevils by nature. My mom was the type to where we would get out in the front yard and somebody'd skin a knee and she'd make a comment like, rub some dirt on it, or we'd get in a pickle building a fort or a fence if I was working with Dad at the time, and she'd say, boys, if we can get a man to the moon, we can figure out these problems. Her parents, they sit in little vacuum bubble taped environments. My parents would try to figure out, they would play a game. Literally, Dad and Mom were driving down the road, back to the Chevy Chase thought in your mind, and my dad would see how far he could get the gas tank to empty before pulling in and getting it filled up with gas. Her dad, being an automotive guy, turns out, who knows this unless you're an expert in automotive, but if you drive an automobile below a quarter of a tank, it's really bad for the fuel injector. And
what does this have to do with primer?
I was just telling him about how different our upbringings were.
Keeping you on track.
So where I came from, when you get in a fight with your significant other, in our case it was my sibling or my mom and dad, whatever the deal is, and you drop a bucket of primer in a very aggressive, angry, sinful way, in my opinion. And the primer comes out of the 5-gallon bucket and splashes you in the face. Like if you've seen these baseball players, they'll be doing an interview and somebody will give them the whipped cream pie in the face. I mean, very similar to that. I mean, this is literally falling off of her eyelashes and her mascara. In our deal, it's like, look, the Lord is clearly trying to tell you something. And maybe we should take a little time out, process this information, maybe wait on the Lord for a second. I mean, I don't want to get overly spiritual here, but let's see what God's got for us in here. Joe, on the other hand, when something like that happens in their family, they go from this very peaceful, tranquil, beautiful environment, like it's sort of almost like you can imagine a yoga state of Zen, to like ninja warfare. And I'm this little white boy from, I grew up right down the street here. Cheeks Barger is my home turf. So I was a Colleyville boy, and so, I mean, a little white kid from the suburbs, and, this gorgeous Asian starts, shooting these wild roundhouse back handspring kicks to the face with the primer dripping off of her face. And I'm not kidding. I'm literally kind of like, I cannot believe that she got, madder and madder, like at me, like I somehow had something to do with it. But as I swear to you guys, this is a true story. It was sort of like this slow motion, kind of like in the movie The Matrix, to where, the bullets are shooting and he's able to do all these awesome moves. Well, I'm kind of doing these back bends, avoiding these roundhouse kicks to the head. And I literally am thinking, I can't hear what she's saying. She's kind of turned into this whoa. And I'm like, I love this woman. I mean, this is gonna work. We're gonna be famous,
So we made it. We made it through that first fixer-upper.
True story. It happened exactly that way.
So this, kind of. So that first year of marriage, we had done our first fixer-upper together, and then we finally opened up the little shop on Bosque that October. And for me, it was one of those things where I just felt like this is kind of my training ground. I mean, when customers would come in, I would have to listen to what they needed and modify, because I really I didn't have any training for this. And Chip was really just my biggest support. He was there every day as he was in and out doing all of his real estate stuff. So we open up the shop on Bosque. Chip is still doing his flips and his renovations, but I'd say around 2006, so 3-4 years into it, early on, we had to really just define, this is what I do, this is what Chip does, so that we could work well together. And I feel like that's something we're always having to kind of go back to anytime we just feel like we're a little off track.
And I think, just to interject real quick, I mean, one of the things that we always talk about when we refer to Magnolia Homes, which is this company that she's talking about that we sort of founded together, it preceded our kiddos. So it was sort of learning how to work together. It felt a lot like a kid. A lot of y'all with small businesses can relate. I mean, the late hours and the complicated circumstances, it never seems to be the same twice, And so Joe and I both learned really early on. We have 4 actual babies, but we always joke that we have 5 babies because we had this business that preceded our firstborn, and we learned how to kind of operate in that universe, what it looks like. And I mean, we can all relate to that who are parents. Sometimes you tag team who's going to wake up the next time to feed the baby, or who's on diaper duty, and some of those similar correlations really affected our relationship as a couple, because that business really felt a lot like this mutual love of ours, and we both found out what we were good at. We found out how not to step on one another's toes as we were trying to build this thing together.
And when Chip was kind of describing the ninja kicks that I was back handspringing him with, it kind of reminded me...
Very athletic young lady.
A little bit of just what we were dealing with in 2007, 2008, just with the whole economy. With things that were coming our way, what we realized as a business is we had to continue to evolve. So I'd say in 2006 and 2007, we were doing a lot of flip houses. But then by 2008, the banks weren't lending as much money. And so for us, we had to evolve into something else to make it, which turned into renovating homes with clients. So that was the first time we had to really step in and realize, okay, we have to hold our clients' hands. This isn't a flip project, which those are easy because you just do whatever you want. You hope you end up staying on budget, make some money, and it's just really me and him. Even in the beginning, one of the things that I just love the most just about the sense of community and the gift it was to us was just when we were first getting married. We had first started renovating our home and opening up our business, Magnolia, and the night before we opened, James, Mark, and Maria were actually our life group leaders at the time, and they had said, hey, can we worship and pray before you open your business? And, you know, in my mind, I'm freaking out. I'm thinking no one's going to show up when I open up those doors the next day, and what did I even get myself into? But they went into that little shop on Bosque, and I just remember the sweetest time that I still think of often, which was just praying and worshiping. And I remember there were so many words spoken that night over our business that really set it apart. It was no longer Chip and Joe are doing a business. It was, this is God's thing. Magnolia is God's. And when I started hearing these words that people were speaking over the company that wasn't even born yet, I realized, hey, God's going to take this somewhere. And even then, I kind of doubted it, like, you don't know what, you know, but
Sure.
those words that were spoken are now what we're seeing today, and just thankful for that community. And even now in this time where it's just, there's a lot going on, lots of exciting stuff, but with that comes a lot of weight, a lot of pressure. We couldn't do this without our community.
Real people doing real things that I think when people see that the way the production company puts together the real couple doing this real, I mean, the real people doing this real experience, I think that was the unique reality about Fixer Upper. It was a couple from a place that you felt familiar with, even though everybody obviously doesn't feel traditionally familiar with Waco, Texas per se. It's the idea that it's their hometown. It's their place where they feel familiar and comfortable. And so, you know, for us, it's just, we want to really highlight people that are out doing amazing things. And in a lot of cases, this is something that sort of happened. We weren't looking for people, quote unquote, that were taking risks. But as we started evaluating these opportunities, we were like, man, these are risk takers. These are folks laying it all out there, trying to create a dream that could or couldn't come to fruition. And to see that is inspiring even to Joe and I. As we watch these episodes now, we think to ourselves, we can do it. We are so excited about the future because we're watching these people take these really amazing risks. And I think that that's probably going to be a vein throughout the network. The risks, the authenticity, I think those are going to be the things that'll be the takeaways. One thing that I would say is our superpower is that Joe and I are not quitters. I mean, throwing in the towel is not something that honestly ever even comes to mind. And I would say that happened pretty early in our relationship, where we just thought, that's interesting, that divorce or leaving one another is not really an option for us. And so somehow that little foundation has definitely served us well, because things have definitely been challenging. We're not perfect, and we have issues and trials and errors just like anybody, but I would say that it's funny when you say throwing in the towel. In fairness, I would admit if we had considered that along the way, but relationally we're in it for forever. You know, this will never be a gossip mag that we don't make it. That's how it ends. And I can kind of see the end of that story. And then when I think about difficult things that we've done, and I would say the real estate crisis of kind of like 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, you know, it didn't hit Waco till a little bit later. So it's a little bit of an extended period that I'm referring to. But, you know, that crisis, Joe and I had multiple opportunities to quit and throw in the towel, and that was just not in our DNA. And so now I think we've taken that and realized that, you know, it's like you can't ever lose if you don't quit. And Joe and I keep showing up day after day, and sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not, but we keep putting one foot in front of the other. Waco, Texas has never been hotter. Literally, the state of Texas in general has never been hotter in general. So, I mean, you know, I think the market still has, from a housing perspective, a few years left in it as far as this amazing, you know, meteoric uptick that we've seen here. The market's gotten really tight. I mean, you know, you go out and you try to buy a flip house and you've got 10 guys competing competing against you, 4 of which had never done this before in their entire lives. So, you know, I mean, it's kind of
So they don't know the right price, maybe?
Yeah, a lot of times you watch these guys go and like, hey, listen, this guy won't be around too much longer. I can wait him out. But, you know, 5 or 6 out of that same 10 are seasoned pros, and you just got to know when to say no. And we turn down houses left and right, but when we get the opportunity to buy right, we love buying and selling.
I think for us, people were asking kind of from all over, can you help us with our house? And, you know, with our young children, and we don't really love to travel right now in the season of life, I think for us it was getting it out there, because our passion really is to help people in their homes, whether it be paint, whether it be decor. Yeah. We feel it's all about home. It all starts there.
We were all in a small development in Waco, Texas. So we had gone from what I would consider to be small flippers and renovators to we had hit a couple of doubles. And we had put a little money together, and so we went all in this particular development in Waco, Texas. And I mean, just right as the market crashed. It was like 08 when we were daydreaming about this project. We bought it in 09 and did all the infrastructure and put all the eggs in one basket come 2010, and the market just fell apart. I mean, I remember like it was yesterday that, I mean, the phone literally stopped ringing almost overnight.
I mean, was that avoidable somehow, or was it just a lesson in?
You know, that's a tough question. I mean, I think obviously hindsight being 2020, everything's avoidable. But for us, we love the idea of the never quit, never give up. A lot of developers, I mean, we were small time, but a lot of bigger developers, I mean, they would find themselves in a predicament like this, and they would just walk away, you know. And for us, we were like, look, this is a local bank who's trusted us with these funds. We've got a couple of people who had already bought houses in this development. So I mean, 2 or 3 people, and we were like, we're not going to abandon this development. We know these people. We live next door to these people.
Chip loved this building for years, and I'm like, I don't know, that looks kind of, it just looked dated. It looked hard, honestly. It's like a big building. I'm like, let's just stick with houses. So for years, he's just always noticed this building on the corner. Well, he started kind of getting aggressive with, hey, I want to buy this thing. And I was like, Chip, we walk into it. I really was like, it scares me. Like all the carpet, it just feels kind of haunted a little bit. I don't know. I was just scared of it. There's a few things that Chip's bought in the past that felt haunted, but so I had a lot of resistance to it. And
turns out that the more haunted the property is, the better deal you
that
get on
is.
these
And he was like, Joe,
quite the advantage.
It's a great deal. But finally, I walked in one day just going, okay, Chip is passionate about this. I want to see what he's seeing. And I walked in and I saw it. And when I'm in the other mindset of like, I don't want it, it's easy for my mind to be like, nope. You know, I can just do that. But then when I want to know what Chip is seeing. So I walked in, he takes me up to this ballroom, and I could see it. I could see the history. I saw the people in here. I saw the parties that were in here. And I was like, this place is really special. And so after that day, it's like, okay, I'm all in.
For me, it doesn't take a process for me to get from point A to point what it could be. I mean, I step into a place like this, and I see past all the paint chips and all the decrepit hardwood floors. I sort of, to some extent, I mean, you know, I don't want to sound like a prophet, but I go back in time to when this thing was in its heyday, and I imagine, and here's the truth of the matter. I mean, I'm a business guy in my core, and I mean that not in this big shot business guy. I mean, just a small business guy, and I see this building, and it becomes real practical for me. If we could buy this building and then improve it for a certain amount of money, and those A plus B equal less than what we could sell it for at the end, it becomes like the simplest mathematical equation. If A plus B equals less than C, which is what we could sell this thing for if all hell broke loose, it becomes kind of fun for me. Like, I know I've got to buy this building at a low enough price to then put the improvement money into the building, and then for this thing to actually be worth more than what we've got in it. I mean, that's it. It's just that simple. But then somehow along the way, I kind of see the hardwood floors, and I think that vision that you were just describing about the people that used to actually enjoy this space for what it was back in its glory days. I can see that activity occurring in a space like this. And I mean, you know, it's just like, and then it just takes money and time and effort to get it back to that spot. And then I think that's the $1 million question. Anybody could see an old building and then put an enormous amount of money into it and then have a property that's underwater that's worth less than what the market would bear. You know, for me, I get a little bit arrogant, like anybody can do that. I've got to do it exactly opposite of that. I got to buy it right. I got to put the right improvements into it. And I got to know for a fact that when this thing's all said and done, there's some equity in it at the back end of it. So all that to say, it's just, this is a fun one because it's big and it's gnarly. And I think big and gnarly kind of excite Joe and I. And then when you get to see this in a year and a half from now, and you see that ballroom activity that she's describing with the people and the energy, I mean, you're going to go, I can't believe I saw this before and after. But off camera, we were talking about you saying you walked in and kind of felt it a little
absolutely.
bit. And I want to encourage you, that's unique. I'd say most people that walk into a building like this would say, quote unquote, you are crazy. Nobody wants to do this. And for you to say, I see it, you know, I mean, you're a step ahead. So if there's not an element of I can't do this or how we going to do this, I would argue Joe and I kind of shy away from, I don't want to say the easy stuff, because surely we're not stupid, right? I mean, do we only do hard things?
I think we're a little stupid, but I also think we like to do hard things. And I think there's something about all of that just, you know, there's got to be a little bit of naive, like being naive to like, let's do it. Chip, I would say.
We're very childish in that. We think that everything's possible, and obviously a few things turn out a little harder than we expected. But the fact that this building is tough and challenging, and I would even argue a little bit outside the immediate bubble. I mean, we did that with the silos. You mentioned the silos. The silos were, you know, we've got a downtown strip, which is called Austin Avenue, which is really historic. That's where the castle's going to be located, and it feels right. It's like being, you know, every town has these historic neighborhoods that have been around for a century, you know, or so. And that's kind of our Austin Avenue area. When we built the silos, it was a little bit off of that beaten path, and there was something about that really attracted us to the property. Well, this is on the opposite end of that. So we got the silos, we got our heartbeat, which is Austin Avenue, and then on the other side is the Karen building. And we thought it would be cool to kind of bookend each of those neighborhoods and communities. And so part of that is even part of the challenge. Like, how do we get people on this side of town to experience this part of the Pocket community? And I think this hotel will become a real anchor in that.
It's something that we don't forget about. I think we're reminded daily of these, and I don't know if it's because we have to do that to just keep ourselves grounded of like, man, we always joke, our favorite house was the one that was 800 square feet, and those were the sweetest times when we were really broke. Like, just always going back to, rental was just a struggle. Everything was hard. But there was something about that hard that just developed something in us that, I don't know, I think it just made us stronger people.
I would argue twofold. It's in our DNA, it's who we really were, so all of this hasn't changed any of that. We are still that couple that's like striving to just make it, you know, but to your point, it's like, I'd say the variable is that this success happened a little bit late in Joe and I's life. So we already had a few kids on the ground. We had, you know, a half dozen years of marriage under our belt. You know, we had kind of grown and evolved into who we essentially were. And these babies on the ground, you know how that is. I mean, it just takes out that self-centered, arrogant, narcissistic kind of part of yourself. You're like, it's all about these kids. And so I think with this new chapter of our life, it's less about, oh, now we can do these things because look what we've accomplished, and more about, I'm going to show these kids that there's nothing that's impossible. We can do hard things. We say this all the time. It's kind of a Gaines family mantra, like, we do hard things. I learned somewhere in my college years that the difference between improbable and impossible, and I wouldn't blame anybody if they said this was in fact an impossible story. Joe and I met, you talk about opposites attract. I mean, you know, very different people in general. We fall in love, match made in heaven, unbeknownst to either of our parents, you know, who were probably fighting it the whole way, at least your parents. My parents were actually in big time support of me.
My parents weren't fighting it. I think they were just wondering
when I was going to get a job.
When he was going to get a job. For me, being in Waco, we had moved, as a little girl, I'd moved around a lot. So I graduated here from Waco, but I remember thinking, I just love this town and I want to really plant my roots here. But after I'd graduated from college, a lot of people left. They were going to Austin, Dallas, Houston, bigger cities. And so one of the things I'd always ask if I had met a guy and we were thinking, you know, I'd say, what are your plans? And so they'd all say, I'm going to go to California or New York. So I always knew, I don't want to move. When I asked Chip when he was at my dad's shop that day, he said, I really love Waco and I want to plant my roots here. So I thought, okay, so that's a start. But I just loved his heart for this town, but I also just love that he knew how to draw me out. I am more introverted, so he had the right questions. And I remember leaving that conversation just thinking, man, a lot of that stuff was really thought-provoking. These questions he was asking me really made me kind of dig in and get a sense for who I was, just because I love the numbers of the business. As far as design, I had no idea what I was doing, and so Chip, when we were dating, he would always buy these flip houses, and I just remember thinking, this guy is crazy. Why would he buy that house? And then after we'd sell it, I'd go, oh, he's actually kind of smart. So our first fixer-upper together, we really learned how to work together. I learned what not to do from a design standpoint. We joke that every room literally had a theme. And at the time I collected sailboats, like the cheap sailboats that you just get at those, cheap sailboats, and lighthouses. And so the front room was a nautical theme. So there were lighthouses and sailboats, and then the kitchen was like country, French country, and then I think for me it was just learning to try. And obviously we moved numerous times after that, and every time we moved, what I started learning was how to get creative within the small budget that we had. And what I loved about it is in those creative moments, it taught me a lot about kind of just thinking outside the box and having to think beyond this tight budget, forced me into this creative spot that I think really taught me well. So the same year we were married, in 2003, we opened up the little shop on Bosque. We named it Magnolia. And I remember for the longest time I was the only one working. I was by myself, and Chip would be in the back. And women would come in and literally ask me for advice. And I remember sitting there behind the counter going, oh my gosh, what am I gonna say? I would literally have no idea. And so I'd start making stuff up and thinking, I hope they don't return all this tomorrow. Well, they never would return it. So I think every time a woman would come in there and ask for my opinion or my advice, that was my way of learning. That was kind of like trial and error. That was my education. So for the first year, I was really just stumbling and just going, okay, maybe this or that. But the more and more I was in the shop, the more I played around. During the slower hours, I'd play around with displays, and I'd really start getting a feel for what it was that I loved. And I realized that's what I had to kind of teach others, is go with what you love and throw the rules out.
If you're gonna wrestle a grizzly bear, that's a 9. You're gonna start a business,
9.
So you lose a couple of bucks, so your friends think you're a loser. What else is new? So I told Joe, I was just like, babe, what are you so scared of? I mean, you go buy this piece of real estate. For me, real estate was always the backdrop. So we loved the building that she bought to do her first store in. So I literally thought, this is a no-brainer. We're gonna make $20,000, $30,000 on this property, period. And you go and lose $20,000 in your first year of business, we would just break even on the sale of the property. So I always felt really confident. as I'm feeling wildly insecure now. This is a 9 on a scale of 1 to 10.
No. You always felt.
I always felt confident about going for it. I was really confident about painting the worst case scenario as not that big of a deal. And Joe, I think, bought onto that. I mean, worst thing that happens, you go start a store, it didn't work.
I think from the beginning, it was one of those things where God knew we had to work well together just because of the nature of our business. But just from the beginning, I think we knew Chip was the big risk taker, he was the big visionary, and then I was the numbers one. I was the one that was like, okay, here's your vision, and these are the steps to get there. And I think we both understood each other's strengths, and rarely were we in the wrong court. Like I'm never the visionary when it came to all that stuff. So I was like, okay, what do you want to do? I'd cry a little bit, say I don't want to do it. Then I'd get on board and figure out how to make it work. But I think we just learned how to work with each other and stay in our lanes and really respect what my strength was and then respect what his strength was. And we've had our ups and downs for sure, but we're the opposite, where I think a lot of couples, a lot of our friends are like, hey, we need that 8 to 5 break. And I really respect that. But for us, if we did the opposite, we're off. So like if I go on a girls' weekend and I come back, it takes us 2 days to get back on the same page because we've been apart. So I think we're just wired differently.
I realized if I didn't work with her, I would definitely implode. My business would probably go down in some sort of a ball of flame. And I'm pretty easygoing. I mean, I think I'm fun to be around. So I think for you, it's easy to be around me. For me, I realized that there was a net benefit, which is you're going to keep me out of jail.
Fact, you bet. God has not forgotten you. He knows your circumstances. He knew us in 2009 and 2010 where we went through some real challenges. I mean, I was sticking my big toe, but sarcastically, it was really like all the way up to my eyeballs in an industry that I really knew nothing about, and even looking back, really had no business in being, which was the development that Joe was talking about. And God walked us through that. He really did. And there were times that we talk about a little bit in our book. It was really cool. We got the opportunity to write a book here a few months back that'll come out at the end of the year. But just reliving some of those experiences brought Joe and I to tears multiple times, because it's interesting when you walk back in your life and you jot down when you feel like God really met you at a particular place, how even a decade later, you know, it feels exactly the same. So I really want to encourage each and every one of you, if you're in a great place, Joe and I certainly feel that to some extent. We feel like we're at a mountaintop kind of moment. Enjoy it. Look around. You deserve it. You know, you've earned it. But if you're in a valley, and we've certainly been in a few of those in our career, keep putting one foot in front of the other. You'll make it.